Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Today is June 15th. This is the Manufacturing Compliance Committee monthly meeting for June. We have a few agenda items just to run into today. The first one is just for discussion. This has come up on Discord and it's been briefly discussed, but just kind of to give an overview for everybody. What are the thoughts from the MCC on approved hotspots mining other crypto tokens in addition to H&T? I think this has kind of been discussed. I think at one point there was discussion that it was okay so long as it wasn't a direct competitor, but I think we should have maybe some clarity around this for everybody or discussion.
I don't see anything wrong with it. Do you guys?
I stand by the ruling we made, as long as it's not a direct competitor in the wireless radio ecosystem. There's no issue. It might even be beneficial.
And also it can't impede the performance of a Helium hotspot, whether it's LoRa or 5G. That's the other requirement, right? So you can't you can't lower the expected performance because you've combined it with some other function.
I also think that we should continue to evaluate each one on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely.
But yeah, but overall, I feel pretty good about having other things on there.
Brad, if it lowers the performance, isn't that just impacting the hotspot owner? Like, I don't like it, but if they want to add, 900 different things so that their hotspot doesn't work.
No, but the Helium network should be providing quality network coverage to people who, if they see a hotspot on a map, they should have some expectation that there's coverage around that hotspot. And if this hotspot performance is compromised and it's only sending 1 out of 10 packets, I mean, that's, just a random, a case, then I don't think it should be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm just devil's advocate here. So what's the difference between, how do we compare that to someone who puts a hotspot in their basement versus someone who puts a hotspot in their roof? We don't make any distinction on that, but one of those hotspots has crappy coverage.
But if there's coverage, so if I did a range test, if I drove to, you go to mappers and you get coverage at the street, even though you have a lot of attenuation, if I send a packet today or I send a packet next Tuesday, it should be, basically the same kind of coverage. If this is a processing issue or an issue with stability of the unit because they're trying to do too many things, then it may be working on Tuesday, but next Wednesday it won't work. So I think it's a little bit different scenario in terms of the implications to the network, right? So if you put up a hotspot, I think we just, there's an expectation that these are highly reliable gateways or, that provide network coverage. And if, that it shouldn't be bouncing around all the time or erratic because the device is trying to do too many things. Yeah, and again, I think it's case by case. I think in most cases, this is not going to be an issue. Particularly with the light miner released, it frees up a lot of CPU and memory. I don't think it's gonna be an issue in most legitimate cases, but it's something that I think as the technical committee reviewing applications, we would just do a sanity check on what do they say they're gonna do? Does it look like it's gonna be viable? And then when they send a test unit in, the test unit should have all the functions running. So you can test the Helium network part of it and show that it works, concurrently with the other stuff that they've integrated, right?
Cool. Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay, let's jump into this next topic that we had talked about. And Brad, if you kind of want to take point on this, is the LBT requirements from manufacturers. What do we need from them to, I guess, confirm that for company or?
Yeah, so I'm just going to summarize the landscape within the LoRa WAN and LoRa Alliance approved channel plans. So if you want compatibility with what's already there, South Korea, Japan, I know there may be a couple other countries that require this LBT function. And there's a specific implementation of that is there in a reference design that requires not only the normal 1302 and the 21250 analog front end chips on the hardware, but the current kind of reference design approved solution for LBT in those markets has an additional radio on the daughter card. It's an SX1261, and there's additional software functionality in the packet forwarder stack that implements the LoRaWAN portion of the protocol that makes sure that the 1261 is being used to implement the listen before talk function. So I think I'm going to phrase this. It's a point of discussion within the committee right now for those markets where the existing LoRaWAN channel plans require LBT. Will the Helium hotspot channel plan also require that? And then is the implementation that's already there based on this extra hardware the only implementation that can achieve that regulatory requirement? To date, that is what we know. I'm not saying definitively that there's not another path there, but I think a manufacturer seeking to go into those markets would have to demonstrate that they have an alternative solution that meets the LBT requirements for those markets that is different than the one that's based on the 1261 hardware and the existing software implementation. So I'll stop there and see if anyone else wants to comment or if that was clear explanation of the situation.
Is the functionality into the Helium code itself, is that to accommodate that, or does the manufacturer have to write their own wrap around the LBT functionality?
Well, so the LBT functionality would have to be in the production application code, right? You know, in theory, like you could just go test for LBT at the protocol level, but then not go actually run it in application code. So I do think that a manufacturer would have to demonstrate, a code contribution that shows that they've actually implemented the light miner with the LBT function, so that the LBT is actually operational in field deployment.
So at the moment, there's nothing in the Helium code stack that implements that for them if that hardware is in place.
So my understanding is that the current Helium stack did not enable that part of the code base, and it may not even be in the source. It is in the Semtech original source, which we can refer people to, but I don't think there's an active branch of it in the Helium repository for the equivalent functionality. And so somebody would have to go, do that software integration to turn it on. At least this is my understanding of the situation.
So presenting the hardware with that capability doesn't really help us.
Right. So really, and again, the what the MCC is discussing is, really from a Helium network perspective, what is the channel plans in these markets that require LBT? Are we going to follow the existing, kind of precedents that are out there? If we are, then a manufacturer that submits a unit for those markets would need to demonstrate that they're meeting the LBT requirement, and they either can follow the existing precedent, which is based on these reference designs from the LoRaWAN ecosystem, or they could come in and show that they have a new novel implementation that meets that requirement that needs to be reviewed. But I don't know that we've seen that level of detail from anybody yet.
I think that kind of addresses that, unless anybody has any specific questions as of right now.
So is there a channel, a Discord channel on this that was started? Am I misremembering that we created one?
Yeah, there is a Discord channel that was started. It's a public channel. Okay, yeah.
So my suggestion is manufacturers that want to enter these markets should maybe we can start to have them participate on that channel, and maybe move this forward so that there's a clear model that the community and all the manufacturers can agree on what's required.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a channel, but there's hardly any, there hasn't really been any discussion inside of it.
Right. So I think that's the first step, is let's get discussion on, and again, if there's novel implementations that meet the requirement that don't require 1261, I think we're open to reviewing. But we haven't seen them yet.
Okay.
You think that we need to ask anything additional?
Of the manufacturers?
Like when they send in their physical hotspot besides asking them, yes, no, are you deploying in a country that requires?
Yeah, I think we should ask them, have you implemented, is this, are you supporting a channel? First, it's not for every region is this being deployed into the regions that we know this is a requirement, a regulatory requirement for? Did you implement it? And if so, how did you implement it?
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, right now, the only regions that I know of are South Korea and Japan. I wasn't able to find any others. Do you know?
Patrick, I know those two are.
I off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. Yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. There are probably some other South Asian countries, but I don't know. I will. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say they probably follow the South Korea channel plan. Then it'd be my guess is if so.
Yeah.
But we can double check. But definitely South Korea and Japan are the main markets.
And maybe we should, just for clarity purposes, we should make an announcement or communication to the makers that the approval of the hotspots is contingent. It's not does not include those areas, or is contingent into proving that they meet those requirements before being able to sell on those countries, just for clarity purposes.
I think that's reasonable, yeah. And I think this is an opportunity for the manufacturers to contribute back to the expansion of the Helium network by coming up with an implementation for this.
But we don't know that if a 1261 can be added like easily into a regular card.
Oh no,
No,
it's on the Semtech reference design. So
well, only core cell, right? If they use 1308, if they have a custom design with 1308 and then 1257, so it's not.
I think my question is it does need to be a custom design. There's not
a
not sure
retrofit.
what I'm asking. When I posted the pictures of the manufacturer that had it, I think someone indicated that there would be an empty space for it.
Yeah, only if they follow the Semtech's core cell reference design.
Okay, got it.
But it's definitely not something somebody can, add after the fact, right?
Right.
It needs.
I think that's my question. Yeah, like, is it? Yeah.
The chip needs to be there during the manufacturing flow. The 13 but it is in the Semtech reference design, so it's not like there's any real new design work that needs to be done from a hardware perspective. It's just the manufacturers building product for these countries would need to populate the 1261 and the miscellaneous other components around that on that radio card. Okay. And so that's step one. Step two is to show that they've actually implemented the LBT protocol in their light miner product.
Okay.
Okay. So are we ready to move on to the next discussion point? Okay. Thank you. So the next point is also about the hardware audits. I think, Sophie, we had discussed wanting to include testing beacon witnessing.
Yeah, we have. So just a little background. I went through with one of the security committee members yesterday. We did an audit together, and we just did we actually looked at the ECC and the radio, and this committee member wondered if we test witnessing and beaconing, and we don't as part of our audit process. And as a group, we've talked about this before, and it would be very time consuming. However, I said, if we had an easy way to put the unit on testnet, it might make sense to start testing that. And so I wondered if anyone had any strong opinions about that. I don't actually know what it takes or how long, I guess, really, how long does it take? But I imagine once I knew how to get it on testnet, it probably wouldn't be, people are putting stuff on testnet all the time. So what do you all think about adding? You're on mute, Brad. Mm-hmm.
I'm not. Am I on mute?
No.
No. Unless you guys probably muted me because I was talking too much. I mean, it's a really workload question. Doesn't that mean more work for you to test the unit? When does it take more time, cycle time to test the units?
It depends on, yes, of course it does, but it depends on how much time. Does it take just configuring it, putting it on and leaving it there? And then, you know, other people, everyone can watch it online? Or is it gonna be like massively fighting with the unit to get each one on testnet for 5 days? That's a different type of workload.
What metrics are we going to get from this? Is it going to be, because obviously there's a huge amount of randomness in terms of the beacons generated, so you couldn't compare a similar timeline. Are we feeding a particular signal into it, or expecting a certain response from it, or what's the parameters?
I think
around
when the network gets more stable, that randomness doesn't affect that much, but yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
So I think I like the idea. I'm just speculating, right? But you know, the rest of us who have tested a bunch of these hotspots, you know, if the product is functioning, it should be pretty quick to onboard it. And then I think it's pretty much just leaving it because of the randomness and stuff for, like you said, like a week, and statistically look at what the expected results are. If we're doing this in the same location, then you could kind of get some relative data of the network around it and kind of do a little bit of A to B. Now, the questions I have is if you're doing this serially one at a time with one device in one location, you can maybe look at a little bit of normalization of the data. But if you have one, then 2, then 5, then 20 all next to each other,
Right.
then all of a sudden their neighbors are going to start to affect the results, and it gets much harder to determine any kind of real performance out of the unit, except for something that's just not performing.
Right.
So I would be a little bit nervous about drawing too much performance conclusion from the data versus just a binary functioning. Yes, it witnessed. Yes, it beaconed. Yes, you know, it seems to be doing that. But trying to say that like this manufacturer's unit did really well last week, and now there's a new manufacturer and it doesn't do so well, that's probably not fair because the environment changed too much between the two tests. So to making the information public, I think there's risk that people are misinterpreting what they're seeing.
Right. But I think a binary, does it work?
Yeah, I like the binary doesn't work, but it doesn't. But that's all we're going to do is a binary doesn't work, and let's not draw any conclusion from any, you know, the actual performance or the frequency or any of that kind of stuff.
So I think from this, I'm just going to take an action item to look into what it will take.
Yeah. And how many units do you think you'd have to run in parallel is one of the, like, can you run 5 in parallel? Like how, you know, I think the flow of, you know, how many new manufacturers are coming in, like that's one of the questions.
At this time, it's a bit of a trickle. So
Yeah, okay.
Soon there will be, you know, 40 all at once to
Right.
look at, to make sure they got through, you know, updating their new firmware.
Yeah.
That said, this isn't, you know, there are a few locations. I feel like it wouldn't be hard to not have them all running off of the same router.
Now you are on mute, Brad.
Yes, I had the noise in my office. I was trying to.
Are we,
Yeah, but
are we
as long,
looking
as,
at
long as we are
the,
able to keep one hotspot per location or per router, it can be doable. But Sophie, please assess how much work that would mean or not, so that the last thing we want is this to overload you. If it doesn't, it's beneficial.
We are going to add, or the security committee is going to add in some more additional testing as well. So there will be, you know, it'll be a fair amount of work assessment. And John, I feel like we keep talking over you. Did you want to say?
no, that's fine. I was going to say, do we measure the actual transmit power of the hotspots, that they comply to the regions that they're asserted in, that kind of stuff? Or do we just take it on trust from the manufacturers? Is that something we should be doing, or?
We take it on trust from both the manufacturer and their regulatory certificates.
Are the only two things that you're trying to check on with a yes, no, like a beacon and a witness, or is there a bunch more stuff in there?
Those are the only two things that I can think of. But of course, there are other things probably that we could be testing.
And so the problem is that you'd have to wait for the beacon to work, but really we don't care. like if it beacons randomly, it's more that it just beacons. Is there a way to enable discovery mode just for kind of one person so that you can sit there and hit the disco, make it beacon so that you know it fires off and then be done with it, so we're not waiting a ton of time?
I would think so. I think
Yeah,
that'd be
but-
worth assessing.
But if you push the beacon using discovery mode, you're gaming the test that it's to see if it naturally performs well. Maybe when you do the discovery, it does beacon, but there might be an issue that prevents it from naturally doing it.
Okay, and I guess 1 week isn't that big of a deal. Like if it's not going to beacon in a week, there's probably a problem. That's kind of the line of reasoning?
I don't have a sense of how it will perform on testnet. I think it's more just to go look and see how hard is it to get it on testnet and how long will it take to see a beacon and a witness.
Check.
But yeah, I agree with Felipe about not gaming. We want to see it happening naturally.
And the difference is with testnet, you'll see, 14 witnesses easily enough. Whereas in the real world, you might every brief of coverage report, you might be 1 in 100 chance of actually hitting that 14.
Right.
Cool. What's next?
Okay, so the next thing is a question that I have. This came up just like this week, but for the 5G, there's the small cell, that's the radio module that attaches to the 5G. Do we have an approval process for this? Is this something that's going to go through the MCC? Kind of wanted to discuss a little bit around 5G and what that's going to look like, specifically with small cells.
Sophie, do you want to comment? I mean, I can share what I know, or do you want to comment and go first?
I will. Yeah, I will comment. I just feel like I talk a lot. I mean, I do talk a lot. Me and Brad, we talk a lot.
We love to hear you.
So the way I feel about the radio is that it's only tested in conjunction with the gateway. The gateway is the thing that we're testing. And the way that the audit process is set up currently is that we have another auditor that's going to handle the 5G proving part of it. And it could be any radio. It could be a bicell, it could be a Circom, it really could be any radio that would be, I believe, tested by the manufacturer or whoever they have for testing. That doesn't fall under HIP 19 in the way I see it. But
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a little color. I agree with what you said. So for everybody who's watching this, know that the gateway, like the Freedom Fi, router unit or whoever's making that, has its own special firmware on it. That unit has to talk to the small cell radio antenna part, and that radio antenna part, the small cell, has to have special firmware that's compatible on it that will talk back to the specific 5G helium compatible unit you're talking about. So be very careful if you go to buy just a random small cell off the internet. If it's not a small cell that has the right firmware on it, it's not going to interoperate with your router. I think from an MOC or MCC perspective, we just need to test the router because that's where the security we care about is, with one small cell example that the manufacturer ships in for the audit. But the manufacturers need to keep a up-to-date list of the specific small cells that their units are compatible with, and a specific list of where they can go buy those small cells that have not only the right model number, but the right firmware to talk to their gateway. I don't think the MCC wants to get in the middle of that, but it should be clear to everybody, because I think you're going to start to see is people trying to mix and match small cells with the gateway router, and it's not going to work because you have a firmware mismatch from the different manufacturers that are coming into the market.
yeah, super point and summarized very well for those watching.
Yeah, we definitely shouldn't get into the small cell part. As with regular LoRa hotspots, we don't audit the kind of antennas people use. and it's the maker's responsibility to make sure, hey, it's the SMA connector or the reverse SMA connector, and people have to use the right antenna for that connector. It's like Brad was saying, this is more complicated. It has to do with firmwares, but still they have to use the appropriate small cell. As long as we test with one that works, and it's one that's recommended, it's up to the maker to make sure that he updates the list of all the antennas that can be used with the device.
Christina, I have a question about light minor approvals, if I may.
Yeah. Mhm.
Have we seem to just, I don't know, be sort of completely stalled on approving light. We've passed, I think hardware audits have passed 17 different pieces of hardware, if I'm not mistaken, but we're still waiting for FCC or radio certifications from all of those 17 makers.
So no, not from all of them. We do have radio certifications from some of them. What we're currently waiting on is the firmware for them to implement it, to check that the firmware is on it before they can be approved from the manufacturers,
Okay.
be approved from the MCC. Now, if we want to, I can put together a list of the ones we have the radio certifications from, so that MCC can kind of get a head start on looking at them. But until we actually are able to confirm the firmware has been updated on them, that's kind of where we're at right now.
And when is that expected?
I don't have the exact date for it. I think what the plan was is that it was supposed to, once all the full hotspots were migrated to the light hotspot firmware, that was going to run for a few weeks to make sure there was, you know, all of the kinks and bugs were worked out. And then that was when the light hotspots would be able to be implemented. So I don't have an exact date on that.
Are we still syncing to the full blockchain on all the existing miners? Or have they stopped doing that as a precaution? They were gonna do it for a while until they knew for sure they didn't have to sort of fall back to the old way of doing it.
If I recall correctly, from the last update from Coco, they are still syncing as a backup, just in case. But yeah.
And I'm sorry, is there an expected timeline when new light miner firmware is going to be ready to let this process move forward? Does anybody have an update on where that?
No, I don't have an exact date for it. That was just supposed to happen a few weeks after this final process from full to light was completed. That's something I can check with Coco and kind of come back to y'all with, but I don't have an exact date right now.
Yeah, that would be
I think it will depend
nice to know.
contingent on the fixing the performance issues and tuning all the stuff. Probably it will be contingent on that. I think
because we really seem to have slowed down the monthly add-on rate, right? We've gone from about 80,000 to about 50,000 in the past 30 days of new gateways joining the network, and you know, I think part of that is due to the fact that, you know, we're kind of in limbo with all these new light miners.
So do you think that it would be more beneficial then to start looking at the radio certifications so that we?
Well, at least, yeah, maybe. But so does that mean you have to re-audit all the hardware anyway?
No, not exactly. It does
Okay.
mean that each hotspot will be slightly re-audited, not fully, but it'll get plugged in. We'll prove that it can update with the latest firmware. And I agree with Christina that it would be a good idea to start looking, because it takes us a while to get through radio certifications. So anyone who's done, we could.
Yeah, maybe we should get a head start of it.
Mhm. Yep. And I agree with your assessment, Nick, about when we're going to be doing that. So yeah, as far as the re-audit, I feel like it's going to be a very busy week when there's 30 or so all happening at the same time, but it's really just going to be plugging them in, making sure they updated their firmware and getting out.
Are you still doing new hardware audits of new light miner hardware, or are you waiting for the light miner firmware at this point?
I am still doing them, but at a much reduced, like I'm not rushing through them.
Okay.
Yeah. There also aren't that many. I think
there were 4 more I saw. In the
yeah,
last
4 or 5 more.
spreadsheet. Okay.
Maybe this isn't the. I'll just mention this. We can take it offline, but does anybody feel like getting more of a structured database in place for this, for managing all this hardware submissions is needed, or do we feel like kind of what we're doing now is sufficient?
I think that depends on what people want. So,
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like going through 17 different links to, you know, shared folders and then managing the like, you know, so like I think we had talked at some point in the past about moving into some more of a structured kind of environment. I'm happy to talk more about that. I think it's pretty quick and easy to set up, you know, using some kind of, you know, low code database structure where it would be nice to be able to log in and kind of see a work queue and keep track of all of this, have all the files like embedded, you know, within a table structure. So, and it's more for you guys who are managing all the Google folders and docs and all this kind of stuff. If you're good with it, you know, like we can manage it our side, but if it starts to become, you know, just this too confusing, then, you know, maybe we should revisit this.
I mean, I'm always
That's an excellent idea. Yeah. I think anything that we can do to make this more streamlined so that there's less, you know, obviously this is a committee that's volunteers and I want to respect everybody's time. So if there's anything that makes it easier for managing as well as easier for everybody to look at, I think that's a great idea.
All right, so I'll move this to our internal chat and see if there's consensus to do something, right? And maybe make it more structured. I just, you know, it's one thing, again, when you have 5 products, 10 products, we now have what, closing in on 100, and then you're going to start to talk about new small cells, maybe other products coming in. It just becomes, you know, this is why people put stuff in databases, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. So I think that's the end of our agenda, unless anybody has anything that we need to add or wanted to discuss. Okay, thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you on Discord. Have a good day.